My name is Gina, and I've always believed that family comes first. I grew up in a modest home in Springfield with my parents and my older sister, Julia, who since childhood has been someone everyone admired. Beautiful, confident, charismatic, able to attract attention without unnecessary effort. She had a lot of friends at school. Teachers always set her up as an example, and at home, her parents were proud of her, although they never said it out loud. Of course, I loved my sister, but sometimes it seemed to me that I was standing somewhere on the sidelines, as if my life was just a pale background for her radiance. I didn't strive for popularity. I didn't try to be better than her. But inside, I had an irresistible desire to prove to myself, and perhaps to the whole world, that I was also worth something, that I was capable of more. That's why I threw myself into my work. Market Tech Solutions became for me not just a place where I earn a living, but an arena where I could show what I was capable of. I worked tirelessly, took on additional projects, stayed in the office late, and hoped that someday I would be noticed. And finally, it happened. Before we continue, I am very curious. Which country are you from, dear listeners? Write in the comments where you are listening to us from. Enjoy listening. That Tuesday, my boss, Mr. Thompson, called me into his office. I remember how my heart sank when I heard his voice. I was sure that trouble was waiting for me. But instead, he uttered words that turned my life upside down. He's watched my work, he's impressed, and he wants me to head up the marketing department at the company's new branch in Colorado. This position meant not only a raise, but also a significant increase in salary, as well as payment for all expenses related to the move. This was the chance I had been waiting for. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I was doing my usual tasks, but my thoughts were far away. I imagined how I would start a new life in another city, how I would prove that I was capable of more than just being Julia's younger sister. I couldn't wait until tonight to tell my family about it. I practically ran into my parents' house, where the whole family gathered every Tuesday. The smell of home-cooked food, the cozy glow of the lamps, the quiet conversation of the parents. Everything was so familiar, so familiar. But today, I knew that something important was about to happen. Julia wasn't there yet. Now she was married to David, a successful accountant, and lived on the other side of town. "You look happy," Mom remarked, stirring the thick spaghetti sauce. I could barely resist blurting out the news right now. "I have amazing news," I said cautiously. "Wait until everyone gets ready," Mom smiled and continued cooking. I waited patiently. Julia and David finally arrived. We sat down at the table, Dad poured wine into glasses, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "I've been promoted," I blurted out, feeling overwhelmed with joy. "They want me to head the marketing department at the new branch in Colorado." There was silence. Mom froze with a fork in her hand. "In Colorado?" "What is it?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that I hadn't expected. "Yes," I nodded. "This is an amazing opportunity. The salary is almost twice what I get now." Mom slowly put her fork down on her plate. "Gina, now is not the time for you to leave." I frowned. "What do you mean?" I looked at Julia. She lowered her eyes and nervously adjusted her napkin. "Julia has been struggling since Blank was born," Mom finally said. My heart sank. "But I thought she was fine." "The doctor diagnosed her with postpartum depression," her father added quietly. I looked at my sister in shock. "Julia gave birth to my nephew Blank just 2 months ago. Of course she looked tired. But I didn't realize how serious it was. "I'm sorry, Julia. I had no idea," I whispered. "I didn't want to worry anyone," she smiled weakly, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "But it was really hard." Mom reached out and squeezed Julia's hand. "She needs family support right now," she said. "David works very hard. They can't afford a full-time babysitter. We thought," my father began, "that it would be better if Julia and David moved here for a while." I looked from Mom to Dad, then to Julia. My stomach tightened. 1 minute, I was on top of the world. The next, I felt like I'd finally broken out of my sister's shadow. And now I'm expected to put my dream on hold for the sake of my family? I felt that my dream was slipping away, but I tried to convince myself that the promotion would not be the last, that new opportunities would arise, that someday I would get a chance to change my life again. However, my mother looked at me the way only she could, with unshakable confidence in her own rightness, with that firmness that left no room for argument. "Family comes first, Gina," she said, and there was no doubt in her voice. I looked around at everyone sitting at the table, saw my father guiltily lowering his eyes, as Julia sat quietly, clutching a napkin in her hands, as if afraid to look at me, saw tiny Blank lying in his cradle next to us, and realized that maybe now really wasn't the time to think about yourself. "You're right," I finally said, even though everything inside me protested against those words. I knew that the decision had already been made, that to abandon it would be a betrayal to my family and, worst of all, to myself. Family comes first. I will tell Mr. Thompson that I cannot take this position. The relief on Mom's face was instantaneous. She even exhaled with some kind of relieved joy, and Julia reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, and there were tears in her eyes. "I do not know what I would do without you." A week later, Julia, David, and baby Blank moved into their parents' house, and I stayed in my current position, managing to negotiate only a small raise. This, of course, was incomparable to what was offered in Colorado, but now it no longer mattered. Every morning I woke up thinking that I had done the right thing, and every evening I fell asleep telling myself that it was temporary. I started giving away $2,000 from my monthly salary to help my sister with medical bills and childcare, which, of course, meant that now I couldn't afford even a small move to a separate apartment and still lived in my parents' house. My life has changed. The days started to look like one another. I'd leave for work in the morning, come home for a quick dinner in the evening, and then take care of the baby while the parents did the housework and Julia rested. I rocked Blank, changed diapers, bathed him, put him to bed, while my sister spent time in her room, claiming that she needed more sleep to recover. By the time I crawled into my bed, I had no strength left at all, but I kept convincing myself that this was temporary, that everything would get better soon, that Julia would definitely get better, and then I could think about myself again. Weeks turned into months, and before I realized it, a whole year had passed. My life turned into a vicious circle: work, home, caring for Blank, sleeping, repeating. I was exhausted all the time, but I kept telling myself that it was worth it, that I was doing this for my family, that this was how it should be. Wilson, my colleague and longtime friend, supported me, and we often talked about how much things had changed. And although he repeatedly asked if I was sure of my choice, I always replied, "Of course. Family comes first." Every morning I ran out of the house while Julia was still asleep, too tired to get up to Blank, and every evening I returned and found her lying on the couch. My parents circled around her as if she were a porcelain figurine that could be shattered with a careless word. "How are you feeling today, honey?" Mom asked while I was warming up a bottle of Blank. "It's still vague," Julia invariably replied, sometimes adding, "The medicine just makes me a zombie." I took Blank in my arms, rocked him, changed his clothes, fed him, and my parents looked at each other and told me to give Julia more time. "She needs to rest more," Mom said, and I clenched my teeth and nodded, even though irritation was already boiling inside me. Blank was already 1 year old, and every day he became more active and at the same time more of a burden. I loved my little nephew dearly, with all my soul, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I had imperceptibly become his primary caregiver while his mother was recovering. To be honest, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. For example, one day I returned home earlier than usual and found Julia's purse full of packages from an expensive shopping mall. Or how she always had new clothes and immaculate manicures, despite the fact that she complained of complete apathy and said that sometimes she couldn't even bring herself to take a shower. One evening, when I found a receipt for dinner at an expensive restaurant in the kitchen, I couldn't stand it and asked my mom a question. "Didn't you say that Julia couldn't even leave the house yesterday because of anxiety?" Mom didn't even look up from the pot of sauce, waving her hand dismissively. "The doctor says it's good for her to go out sometimes. It's part of the treatment plan." I nodded, But somewhere in the depths of my soul, doubt had already taken root. It grew, spreading thin but tenacious shoots in my mind, forcing me to replay what I saw and heard over and over again. I remembered how last week, when I was going out for lunch, I accidentally noticed Julia through the window of the coffee shop near the office. She was sitting at a table with her friends, laughing so loudly that her voice could be clearly heard even through the glass. She gesticulated animatedly, her eyes sparkled. Sincere joy played on her face. There was no trace of that tired, depressed woman who could barely get up from the couch when I was around. And then the day came when everything changed. I woke up with a terrible headache that wouldn't let go even after 2 painkillers, throbbing in my temples, giving off a dull, obsessive pain in my eyes. By noon, I could barely concentrate on the monitor screen. The numbers blurred before my eyes, and my head felt heavier than lead. My boss, noticing my condition, strongly advised me to go home and rest, and I, without much resistance, agreed. I didn't call home to warn her that I would be home earlier than usual. I just wanted to put my head on the pillow in the silence of my room and let sleep take me away from the aching pain. But when I drove up to the house, I was overcome by a strange feeling. Something was wrong, barely perceptible, but disturbing. I saw that Julia's favorite shoes were not at the front door where she always left them. It seemed strange to me because just yesterday she complained that she could barely get out of bed and that even the simple thought of having to get dressed made her feel infinitely tired. I quietly entered the house intending to go straight up to my room, but I had barely taken a few steps down the hallway when I heard a sound that made me freeze. Julia's unmistakable laughter came from the kitchen, not the polite, strained way it had been with our parents, but a real, sincere, bubbly laugh that I hadn't heard in months. And then I heard her say, choking with laughter, "Melissa ordered another portion of mimosa, and we completely lost track of time. The waiter had to remind us that they close at noon." I froze, feeling my headache recede for a moment before a wave of bewilderment washed over me. Everything inside me shrank. It didn't seem like someone who was suffering from debilitating depression. I pushed open the kitchen door. Julia was sitting at the table with her mom. They were both smiling, with cups of coffee and plates of leftover cake from her dad's birthday in front of them. As soon as Julia saw me, her face instantly changed. The smile disappeared, her shoulders slumped. She reached for a napkin, as if she was going to wipe the traces of joy from her face. "Gina," she said in that quiet, fragile voice I'm used to, "I wasn't expecting you so early." I stared at her. "I have a migraine," I said, feeling every cell in my body tense. I couldn't concentrate on my work. Mom immediately jumped up, her face immediately showing alarm. "Oh, poor thing. Let me get you some tea and an ice pack," I said quickly, without taking my eyes off Julia. "What were you two laughing about?" It sounded funny. I saw them exchange quick glances, as if searching for the right words. "Oh, it's just a stupid commercial on TV," Mom finally said, not too convincingly. "Really?" I cocked my head to the side. Julia dabbed her eyes with a napkin, quickly restoring her usual image of a tired and sick woman. "Just a story from the past. You know, before blank. Sometimes Mom makes me think of happier times. Dr. Harrison says it helps." I nodded silently, but doubt continued to flare up in me. That night, after I put blank to bed, I ran into my mom in the kitchen. Dad was sitting in the living room watching TV, and Julia was taking one of her long, therapeutic baths. "Mom," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "is Julia really still suffering from postpartum depression? It's been a year. Sometimes she seems completely normal." Mom tensed, wiping her plate with a kitchen towel. "Of course she's not okay, Gina," she said with emphasis. "Why do you ask?" I looked at her, debating whether to say everything that was on my mind. "I heard her laughing today, saying that she went out with friends. It's not like someone with severe depression." Mom abruptly put the plate in the sink, pursing her lips. Mood swings are part of her condition. Some days are better, some days are worse. Don't judge things you don't understand. I felt something tremble inside me. "I'm not judging, Mom," I said softly. "I just want to make sure that we're really helping her and not—" She interrupted me, her voice getting sharper. "Your sister is sick. She is undergoing treatment. It's not your place to question her illness." I froze, feeling a strange, unpleasant heaviness growing in my chest. I knew that if I said anything else, I would cause an argument and Mom would leave, slamming the door behind her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to tell myself that it was all just my fatigue, just my imagination. But something was screaming inside me, demanding answers that no one wanted to give me. I retreated, but that night, lying in the dark, listening to the steady breathing of the sleeping house, I couldn't bring myself to fall asleep. One thing after another came up out of place in my head. Julia's laughter, her expensive purchases, regular trips to beauty salons, stories about gatherings with friends that she so carefully hid. And all this against the background of her constant helplessness when it came to taking care of blank. The feeling of anxiety and doubt grew in me, and at some point I couldn't stand it. I grabbed my laptop, turned it on, and started reading everything I could find about postpartum depression. I went from one article to another, flipped through medical research, and studied forums where women who had experienced this condition shared their experiences. Yes, everywhere there was talk of mood swings, times of improvement and deterioration. But in all cases, the key symptom was the inability to function properly, as well as a general apathy towards everything that used to bring joy. Women with PD had difficulty caring for their children, but Julia didn't seem to have the slightest problem handing blank over to me and disappearing. They neglected to take care of themselves, but my sister did not miss visits to the hairdresser and always found time for manicures and shopping. Most sources claim that with proper treatment, improvement occurs within a few months, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, but it was always visible. But in Julia's case, a year had already passed, and by a strange coincidence, her condition remained unchanged, at least when I was around. The next morning, as soon as I woke up, I tried to talk to my mom again. I showed her some of the articles I'd found the night before, choosing my words carefully so as not to provoke an instant defensive reaction. "I'm just worried," I said. "These symptoms don't really correspond to what we see in Julia." But Mom didn't even look at the screen. Instead, she grabbed my phone and frowned in annoyance. "What's wrong with you, Gina?" she exclaimed, as if I had said something blasphemous. I spoke with Dr. Harrison yesterday, and he said that Julia's case is particularly difficult. Her recovery will not follow some kind of internet checklist. I backed away, realizing that this conversation would lead to nothing, but an unyielding determination settled inside me. I wasn't going to take anything for granted anymore. Over the next few weeks, I carefully observed Julia's behavior, monitored her reactions, and noticed little things that had previously eluded me. I saw how her face lit up when she thought no one was watching, how she instantly sent messages to her phone, but immediately hid the screen if I entered the room. I noticed that her bad days surprisingly coincided with family responsibilities that she wanted to avoid, especially when it came to caring for blank. Something was wrong. I was determined to find out what it was. And then, suddenly, something good appeared in my life. At work, Mr. Thompson called me back to his office. "Gina," he began, sitting down at the table, "I know that you were unable to take up a position in Colorado last year, but I want you to know that your dedication has not gone unnoticed. We appreciate you, and that's why we decided to promote you to Senior Marketing Analyst. This means a 15% salary increase." I almost burst into tears with relief. After everything that has happened over the past year, something good has finally happened in my life. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I said, barely able to contain my emotions. "It really means a lot to me." But when I returned home, I made an unexpected decision for myself. I did not tell my family about my promotion. Something told me that as soon as Mom found out about the additional income, she would find a way to convince me that this money should go to Julia's treatment or some other emergency situation. I didn't want to feel like my life belonged to someone else anymore, so I decided to keep it a secret, continuing to give my family the same $2,000 a month that I had been transferring all year and put the rest into a savings account. By this point, I was completely burned out. I worked full-time and then returned home, where I assumed the role of Blank's primary caregiver, while Julia continued to recover. I haven't been on vacation for over a year. I didn't even have a weekend to spend alone with myself. I needed a break. "I think I need to take a vacation," I announced at dinner one May evening, trying to speak as calmly as possible so as not to cause a storm of objections. "Vacation?" Mom looked up from the plate she'd just been feeding Blank from. "Yes, I'm considering trips to Hawaii," I said, trying to ignore the sudden tension in the room. "Hawaii?" Mom frowned. "That sounds expensive." "I've been saving up," I replied quickly. "And now it's a good offer. I need to get some rest." I expected objections, but surprisingly, I found support where I did not expect it. "I think it's a great idea," my father suddenly said, which surprised me a lot. Everyone needs a break sometimes. I looked at him gratefully and then looked at Julia, expecting to see displeasure or even reproach on her face, but she just nodded and smiled gently. "You should definitely go, Gina," she said, with the same gentle concern with which she usually thanked me for my help. "You've helped Blank so much. You deserve it." Their easy agreement made me wary, but at that moment I was too excited about the prospect of a vacation to sort out my suspicions. Just a month later, for the first time in a long time, I felt real anticipation. Ahead was my well-deserved vacation, a few days that I could spend without thinking about endless worries, without hearing a child crying, without feeling my mother's heavy gaze on me, demanding another sacrifice for the sake of the family. I often mentioned my trip over the next few weeks, not only because I was excited, but also to make sure that no one would forget I was really leaving, and this time nothing should get in the way. I entered my departure date into the family calendar hanging in the kitchen, arranged with my colleagues at work for a little extra workload before the vacation so that everything would be completed, and even selected the things I was going to take with me. However, the day before my departure, when I returned home after work, I froze on the threshold of the living room, seeing in front of me a scene that I could not have expected. Julia and David were sitting on the couch, and around them were suitcases, large, expensive, obviously packed for several days. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling anxiety rising inside, like an icy lump squeezing my stomach. David looked guilty, didn't look up, and Julia nervously fiddled with the hem of her blouse. "Julia's doctor thinks she needs specialized treatment," he finally said. "What kind of treatment?" I asked slowly, knowing in advance that I would not like the answer. "There's a facility in Malibu that offers an intensive treatment program for treatment-resistant postpartum depression," he began, but I immediately interrupted him. "Malibu?" I asked, feeling a wave of irritation wash over me. "We're leaving tomorrow morning," Julia said quickly. "The program is designed for a week, maybe 2. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, my mom intervened from the kitchen. "We know that this coincides with your vacation," she said, as if she had prepared this argument in advance, and her voice was too flat, too devoid of emotion. "It's an unfortunate time, but Dr. Harrison says Julia can't wait any longer for this treatment." It was like an electric shock. "Who's going to keep an eye on Blank?" I asked, already knowing the answer. There was a short pause, then my father coughed and said, "We were hoping you could postpone the trip, just for a few weeks." I stood there, stunned by their arrogance, unable to believe what I was hearing. "My flight is tomorrow," I reminded him, almost in a whisper, trying to control my racing heartbeat. "I will lose the deposit for the hotel, the money for the plane ticket." "I'm so sorry, Gina," Julia whispered, and I saw tears instantly appear in her eyes, as if someone had flipped a switch. "I didn't plan on it, really. But Dr. Harrison says that this program may be the one that will finally help me recover." I looked at their faces, Julia's calculating tears, at the stern, confident expression on Mom's face, the guilty avoidance of her father's gaze, to David's obvious discomfort. Something inside me broke. "Okay," I said harshly, feeling the words I didn't want to say coming out of my mouth. "I'm canceling my trip." Later that night, when I had made all the calls, having lost almost $800 in non-refundable deposits, when I closed my laptop with the canceled reservation, I sat on the bed and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't allowed for a long time: pure, genuine anger. It was all too convenient. It was too perfectly planned, too closely aligned with my plans to be an accident. The next morning, Julia and David left for their treatment program in Malibu, and my parents were suddenly busy too. My father went to play golf with friends. My mother went to the book club. So, as always, I was left alone with blank. When evening came and I finally put the baby to bed, I stood in the hallway staring at Julia and David's bedroom door, and something dark flared up inside me, something that I could no longer resist. I'd never been into other people's stuff before, but now I needed to know the truth. I pushed the door open. The room was neat, as if it had been carefully cleaned before leaving. I started with the drawers of the dresser. Nothing unusual, just stacks of folded clothes and small things like perfume and combs. But then I opened the closet and saw that it was literally full of new clothes, with tags that still had prices on them. I frowned. She turned to the bedside tables, opened one, then the other. No prescription bottles, no doctor's notes, no therapeutic sheets, nothing that even remotely indicates that Julia was actually undergoing treatment. And then my eyes fell on her laptop, which was on the table. It was open. I hesitated for only a moment before I sat down at the table and began to examine its contents. Open browser tabs, mail, social networks. I clicked on her Facebook posts and found a long thread of correspondence with her friend Melissa, the same Melissa I'd heard in the mimosa story, the one Julia had so much fun with while I rocked blank at night. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the weeks of messages, clinging to every word, trying to figure out exactly what I was reading right now. Julia complained that she had to pretend to be depressed when I was around. And then I saw my name. Melissa. Does Gina suspect something? Julia. No, she's such a naive fool. She doesn't notice anything. He just gives away the money and sits with the child for free. It's almost too easy. I felt sick. My temples were pounding and my fingers were numb as I continued to read. Julia, I think we can stretch this out for at least another year. Then I'll recover, return to work, and send blank to kindergarten. By then, Gina won't be as useful anyway. Melissa, are your parents still on board? Julia, of course. They'll tell Gina that I'm cured when we decide it's time. They should be happy that their beloved daughter and grandson live with them, and Gina's money helps everyone. This is an ideal scheme. Melissa, you're a master of intrigue, Judas. Julia, but I don't feel bad about taking advantage of my sister. Melissa, why? Julia, she was always jealous of me. Besides, she can afford it, and we've saved so much on childcare this year. I leaned back, my whole body numb from shock. It was all a lie. Every tearful episode, every bad day, every excuse. For a whole year, Julia pretended to be sick, while I worked myself to exhaustion, taking care of her child, while I gave my money to help the family, while my parents, knowing the truth, looked me in the eye and still allowed me to continue. My phone vibrated with a new message. Mom, can you cook dinner by 6? We're taking Chinese food for ourselves, but we forgot to ask what you want. They didn't even think about me. Such a trivial message. But suddenly, everything inside me finally fell into place. I photographed Julia's conversation with Melissa, saving the evidence. Then she closed the laptop, leaving everything as it was. I spent the next few days pretending that nothing had happened. I smiled when my mother asked me to help with blank, nodded when my father talked about business, answered with short, uh-huh, and of course, to empty words. But there was planning going on inside me. I called my friend Stacy, the one who had been trying to persuade me to leave my family for months, saying that I was giving too much and getting nothing in return. I need somewhere to stay while I'm looking for an apartment, just for a few weeks. Stay as long as you need to, she replied without hesitation. I'll cover for you. I waited until the day Julia and David were supposed to return from their treatment program in Malibu, a program that was probably just a luxury vacation. I've already seen their posts on social media that they thought were hidden from me. Photos of cocktails by the pool, spa treatments, walks on the beach. That evening, I went up to my room and began methodically packing my suitcase. Downstairs, my parents were watching TV and playing with blank, unaware that this was the last night I would perform my role. When I went downstairs with my suitcases, the expressions on their faces were priceless. "Gina," Mom abruptly got up from the couch. "What's going on?" "I'm leaving," I said calmly. My father frowned. "What do you mean, leaving?" "You can't leave now. Julia's not even at home." I smiled bitterly. Julia is not at home because she is vacationing in Malibu and is not undergoing treatment for an illness that she does not have. A sharp exchange of panicked glances. "Gina, you're talking nonsense." Mom shook her head, her voice trembling, not with regret, but with fear. "Julia is very ill. She's in a specialized medical facility." I narrowed my eyes. "Really?" I asked slowly, pulling out my phone. "Then perhaps you can explain it to me." I opened the photo of Julia and Melissa's correspondence, zoomed in on the text, and brought the screen closer to Mom's face. Her lips turned white. What is it?" "What is it?" she whispered. "This?" I looked from her to my father, who suddenly looked 10 years older. "This is proof that your perfect daughter used you. She used me, that she had been deceiving us for years, and you knew." "Gina, listen," my father began, but I raised my hand, not wanting to listen. "No, you listen to me. I've lost a year of my life working like hell, taking care of a child you didn't even really trust me with, and sending money that could have gone towards my own life. Meanwhile, she enjoyed shopping, hanging out with friends, and trips to the beach. And you let it happen. You looked into my eyes and let me." Mom took a deep breath, but I didn't let her speak. "I'm leaving." I picked up the suitcase again. "And I won't let you treat me like a servant anymore." "What about blank?" "What is it?" my father asked suddenly, as if this was the last chance to keep me. I looked at my little nephew, who was sitting on the floor with a toy in his hands, not understanding anything. He is their responsibility. Turning around, I walked to the door, ignoring the voices calling out to me, ignoring Mom's attempts to grab my hand, ignoring the feeling that finally, for the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself. I took out my phone, turned the screen to my parents, and showed them photos of Julia's correspondence with Melissa. I wanted to see their reaction. I wanted to hear what they would say when they realized that they no longer had any excuses, that their game had been exposed. "She's been pretending all year," I said in a flat voice that seemed alien to me, "and you both knew." Mom turned pale, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers gripped the armrest of the chair so that her knuckles turned white. The father opened his mouth, about to say something, but only stuttered miserably, as if trying in vain to come up with at least some explanation. "You all used me," I continued, amazed at how calm my voice sounded, despite the fact that a storm was raging inside me. "You took my money. You've taken up my time. You forced me to turn down my promotion. You forced me to cancel my vacation. You used me as a free babysitter and ATM. "Gina, this is some kind of misunderstanding," my father began, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture, but his voice trembled, and I knew he didn't believe what he was saying. "We were just trying to help Julia." "No," I said, cutting him off. "You helped Julia at my expense. You've always given her a preference, but that goes beyond mere favoritism. This is a scam." Mom changed tactics. Her voice became tougher. There were metallic notes in it, in which I heard anger rather than remorse. "You're being ridiculous," she said with disdain, crossing her arms over her chest. "We're a family. We help each other." I laughed, short, bitter, almost horsical. "Do we help each other?" I repeated, slowly shaking my head. "Have any of you helped me at least once? I did the math, you know. I counted exactly how much you took from me." I paused, watching the tension build in the room. $24,000 of my salary for the last year, plus about $12,000 that I would have to pay for babysitting services. I looked at them, taking a pause, enjoying the way their faces slowly elongated in realization. "You owe me $36,000. My father stood up abruptly, his face contorted with anger. "Now you're being absurd." "Stop it," he roared. "We don't owe you anything." "That's what a family does." I lifted my chin, looking him straight in the eye. "No, Dad. The family does not lie or manipulate each other. A family doesn't pretend to be mentally ill to avoid responsibility. My father exhaled loudly, clenching his fists. "What are you going to do?" Mom said, her voice sounding cold, but there was no longer the same confidence in it as before. I looked at her and then slowly said, "If you do not return the money to me, I will sue you." "You wouldn't dare," Mom screamed, throwing up her hands as if I had just declared war on them. I paused, then took out my phone and turned the screen back to them. I have Julia's correspondence where she admits to cheating. I have bank statements showing all my transfers. I even have a subscription from the treatment center in Malibu, which is actually a luxury resort and spa. I looked at my father, who suddenly sank into a chair, as if his strength had instantly run out. I am sure that David's employer will be very interested to know that he participated in this scheme. His face turned white. "You're going to ruin your sister's marriage," he croaked. "You already destroyed this family when you decided to exploit me," I replied coldly. I took a slow breath, then said the last thing I had to say. "You have a week to transfer the money to my account. If that doesn't happen, I'll file a lawsuit and make sure everyone finds out what you did. Relatives, friends, your church community, everything." Mom gasped as if I'd hit her. "This is outrageous," she muttered. I raised my eyebrows. "After all we've done for you," she continued, her voice breaking. I chuckled. "And what exactly have you done for me lately, Mom?" I asked calmly, "besides taking my money and time?" She was silent. "I work full-time and come home to become a parent of a child who is not even mine, while his real mother goes shopping and drinks cocktails with her friends." I picked up my suitcases. "I'm leaving." I headed for the door. "You can't just leave," Mom shouted at my back. "What about Blank?" I froze, turned over my shoulder, and looked at her. "Blank has 2 parents and 2 grandparents," I said flatly. "Maybe it's time for them to start behaving accordingly." I turned around and went out. I didn't even look back when I heard my mom calling my name. Stacy was waiting in the car at the curb. When I sat down, she squeezed my hand. "Okay?" "What is it?" she asked, looking into my face. "No," I answered honestly, closing my eyes. "But I will." 3 days later, I signed a lease for a small studio apartment near my office. She was small, but perfect. No one could take advantage of me now. Now no one could make me feel guilty for putting myself first. When Julia and David returned from Malibu, my phone exploded with endless calls and texts. They started with anger, short, harsh words full of accusations and indignation, as if I had done something unforgivable and not just regained what belonged to me. Then their tone changed to one of apology, cautious, almost timid phrases followed by panic, and soon there were pleading requests. "Julia, please talk to us. We didn't want things to go that far." "David, Gina, we're so sorry. Let's meet and resolve this issue." I didn't answer. I didn't even feel the need to answer. A week after I left, as I had warned, I received a notification about a bank transfer, $36,000, from the joint account of Julia and David. No accompanying message, just the numbers that finally made me free. A few hours after the transfer, I received a new message from Julia. "We sent the money. Can we talk now?" I looked at the screen, at those words, in which there was no remorse, no regret, only the hope that now everything could just be forgotten, as if nothing had happened. I wrote back just one sentence. "I got what I needed. Don't write to me anymore." Then I blocked their numbers. I did the same thing when my parents tried to contact me. It's been 6 months. Sometimes I miss them. No, not according to them, but according to the version of the family that I would like to believe. The idea is that I have people close to me who take care of me the same way I took care of them. According to the fantasy of a house where you are loved, supported, where you can be yourself without fear that at any moment you will be used and thrown away as an unnecessary thing. But I don't miss their manipulations. I don't miss the feeling that I'm just a resource that can be milked until I break down. I still work at Market Tech, but now that rumors have started circulating in the office about the opening of a new branch in Austin, I have already told Mr. Thompson that I am interested. I like the idea of a new city, a new life, the opportunity to sever all ties with this place, where every corner holds reminders of how I allowed others to consume me. Sometimes I lie awake at night and wonder if I'll ever be able to forgive them. Not for them, for my own sake. Anger and betrayal are still deep and heavy in me, and they make it hard for me to trust anyone new. And it's hard to believe that not all people are like my parents and sister. But I'm working on it. I'm saving up for a down payment on my own house. I should have enough in 2 years. Stacy thinks I should try therapy, and maybe she's right. Not everyone is like my family. Not everyone uses it if you let them in. The other day I ran into Julia at the grocery store. I was standing in the vegetable department picking apples when I heard a child's voice calling me. "Gina! Gina!" I froze, momentarily forgetting where I was, then slowly turned around. Blank was sitting in the cart, reaching out to me with small hands, his eyes shining with joy, as if he recognized me, as if he still remembered me. Julia stood next to him, her hands on the handle of the cart, and her face instantly turned whiter than paper, as if she had seen a ghost. I was looking at Blank. He's almost 2 years old, and he's already talking so much. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of longing. I felt something painfully shrink inside. I really missed this little boy. I missed the way he laughed when I tickled his legs. I missed his warm palms squeezing my fingers before going to bed. But then I looked at Julia. She remembered everything she had done, everything my parents allowed. I remembered every lie, every humiliation. I slowly put the apple back in the drawer, turned around, and left. Julia didn't follow me. I didn't hear her call out to me, and it was the right thing to do. Maybe one day I will create a new family, a real one, built on honesty and mutual support, and not on manipulation and exploitation, not on the eternal game of sacrifice where I always find myself the loser. But right now, I'm focused on myself, on healing, building the life I deserve, to remember that I also matter. And when this transfer to Austin happens, I'll be ready. A new city, new people, new features, and finally, a chance to define yourself not as Julia's sister, not as Blank's aunt, not as a doormat in the family, but simply as Gina, a woman who has finally learned to put herself first.